Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the pack. It's Alpha the Wolf Craze, and today I kind of want to talk about what's going on with FCE. I think a few people have already put out videos or put out their statements, written, spoken, whichever medium they've chosen. I recently just watched Petrifying Pumpkins today, and he's coming from a perspective of kind of being, I don't want to say part of the team, but heavily invested in ways that I'm heavily invested in Alpha. So I understand his perspective. But I also want to talk a little bit about my perspective, not only as a longtime fan and player, but also as a content creator for their video games. First Contact Entertainment came to the scene, not necessarily through Firewall first. It actually was through a game, ROM Extraction. It was a sci-fi wave-based shooter where you're pretty much planted in this space station and you defended against an onslaught of aliens. Now, the graphical fidelity of the game was incredible. The audio was pretty good, but it was a wave shooter. It wasn't what we've come to know as, Firewall Zero Hour or Firewall Ultra, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it was at least the first step into VR. Some of the developers came from a flat screen FPS background, whether it was on Call of Duty or other titles of the sort. So it's not like they were unfamiliar, but they entered the realm of VR with expectations of doing kind of what they did on flat screen, but in virtual reality. With the speed at which technology was evolving, it seemed like the right direction to go. In 2018, they released their game Firewall Zero Hour without much expectation, I guess, for it to succeed well. It really did take off. The first initial trailers that we saw, the interviews that we got to hear, and the gameplay that we got to see was above pretty much everything else that we were seeing on the PSVR at the time. I mean, this was 2018. PSVR released, I believe, in 2016. The only thing we really got at the time was Farpoint, which was a fantastic shooter, and it was because of them that we got the aim controller. But First Contact Entertainment wanted to take that to the next level and implement what they believe to be more tactical warfare type gameplay into the VR realm on a platform that was, let's say, and let's all agree on, was underappreciated. PSVR 1 was not the most appreciated platform. PCVR was being run essentially by Oculus at that point. Like everybody had an Oculus CV1 or maybe even a Windows mixed reality or some other variant, but it was always PCVR. So First Contact Entertainment really took the technology that PSVR 1 had and they ran with it and pushed it to its limit. 2018, they released Firewall Zero Hour, and to much surprise, it was I would say, a critical success, at least in terms of popularity. I can't speak to the finances, but I can only assume based on how much it cost to pay for the game and make the game, I can't imagine they actually took home a lot of money. Now, from what I understand, they originally developed the game with PCVR in mind, but they needed the backing. They needed the financial backing, and they decided to partner with Sony. The offer was there, and Sony having I don't want to say a pitless end, a bottomless pitless end of financial security there, but they had so much more than probably what FCE was coming in with, and it really paid off. Now, in the following year, in 2019, that's when they took their base game mechanics and the base gameplay design, everything that we saw in Firewall Zero Hour at launch, and they upped the ante. They gave it a brand new facelift through Nightfall, which had its own issues because of the the player-to-player servers not really working very well. Like you couldn't connect to a game. It was miserable in terms of network connectivity. But the game itself got a beautiful facelift in terms of graphical fidelity, a brand new UI, and a whole lot more content that came along. If you look at the old video game footage of when it first released, it was very bare bones, basic, flat colors, flat panels, and even the weapons were silhouettes. They weren't actually the image of the weapon itself. So that new UI upgrade through Nightfall and the introduction of operations, which now added a new mechanic, which was completing operations to get content. This became more like a seasonal pass sort of thing. That's when it all came into play, and so much came along with that. It was very exciting. New maps, new contractors, new weapons, new cosmetics. I mean, I was chomping at the bit. I loved it. It was around this time that competitions also started. The Gaming Synergy Pro League started, which I didn't know about initially. And then there was a North American Firewall League that started. And that's what got me into the whole competitive scene in the first place. But why am I bringing all this up? It's like, Wolf, we're supposed to be talking about FCE and like kind of the what happened. You know, why did it happen? Like why does this impact you? Well, this is why it impacted me, because for the first time, I actually played a first-person shooter. Being an avid gamer since the Nintendo era, I have never once really gotten into first-person shooters on flat screen. I could never do it. But VR, it was a whole different field. And for many of us, first-person shooters in VR is how it was meant to be played. It was how that genre was supposed to be played. So when FCE made Firewall 0 Hour, it was a no-brainer. You're going to pick that up and you're going to play it. And I couldn't have been happier with my experience. Hence the competitive thing. But it brought more to the table than just filling that void of VR FPS. It gave me everything that I have today. I competed, but when I decided to become a sub rather than a core member, I decided to watch my teammates play. And then people decided to watch me watch my teammates play and have conversation about it. And then it was demanded or requested. There was a demand for what I was doing. And then that spiraled into what we now have today as Amateur Hour Commentary. It wouldn't be without First Contact Entertainment's efforts and the title that they made in Firewall 0 Hour that Amateur Hour would exist. Without it, it probably wouldn't exist. I mean, I cannot be more grateful. And why is this so critical? Because it was the community that really held up the game. It gave the developers, in my opinion, I'm not speaking for them, but in my opinion, it gave them reason to continue to make content. In fact, a lot of what the community was doing, First Contact was paying attention to. So much so that they even invited us, Amateur Hour Commentary, onto their YouTube channel to cover their Firewall Friday matches. Something I have never even thought of possibly doing. And I did it with some friends. Now, some of those friends departed and some of those friends are no longer friends. But the experience that I had throughout the years from 2019 to present, and I'm still going with Amateur Hour Commentary along with my partner Titch, it wouldn't be without First Contact Entertainment and their support and their willingness to bring us onto their own platform to present to the world our way of playing and capturing this footage. It became so much part of my life that we were now covering Gaming Synergy Pro League matches. We were covering North American Firewall League matches. We were asked to try to cover other matches, but it was outside of our time zone and we weren't a really big crew. It led to a better understanding of how to develop sets, how to run production, how to create marketing material, knowing what is good for the viewer versus what we actually want. For instance, like instant replays. Firewall 0 Hour didn't have instant replays. We would have to make them ourselves. But with a crew of 2, instant replays didn't make any sense. And plus, it'd be distracting. Having both screens, like a miniature screen on a larger screen, we tried that, but people hated it, so we stopped doing it. Instead, we split it. So now each team has their own perspective individually. I mean, we learned to do so much, and it was because of this title that we beloved with all of our hearts. We followed this game all the way to its, I don't want to say end because it's still ongoing. People are still playing it, but we followed it all the way to the point where we couldn't follow it anymore. The game finally concluded. The last operation was done, Operation X. It was over. 10 seasons. That's fantastic. For a game on PlayStation VR 1, the longevity of Firewall 0 Hour is unmatched. You will not find another PSVR title or even VR title in a competitive sense and in a multiplayer sense. Maybe Echo Arena, maybe that had it. But particularly on the PSVR one, you will never find anything that goes unmatched today as one of, if not the only multiplayer game that has sustained such a long lifespan. And to that, we should be grateful for Firewall and be grateful for FCE. When I learned news of Ultra, and when we all learned news of Ultra, we had high expectations. Why? Because the bar was set so high by 0 Hour. The development team was a little shy, and I say this in a very understanding way, such that Firewall was not their property. Firewall was the property of Sony. And for anyone who knows how the gaming industry works, it is those who pay for the game or own the game. In other words, they have the largest investment in the game. They are the ones who make the decisions. They are the ones who greenlight certain conversations, greenlight certain projects, greenlight anything. And if Sony owns the game, and this is from personal experience, so I understand how this works. If Sony owns the game, they're going to be extra cautious in the marketing. They're going to do it very specifically. They're going to tell the developers to keep their mouths shut. They're going to tell them when to say things, how to say things. It's very PR. And in my experience, Sony is very poor in communicating with developers. They just always have been. If it is not a Sony developer, which First Contact Entertainment was not, they were just the developers of the IP, but they were not owned by Sony. Hence why we also got Solaris Offworld Combat, which I would love to talk about very briefly, was a fantastic game, but it had its failings. I think it had at its core a very good concept, and they even developed on it, and it could have been bigger had they met certain benchmark criterion, which we'll kind of talk about when I discuss the issues with 0 Hour and also Ultra. Now, why do I bring up Sony and their part to play in this? Because a lot of people really do blame FCE. They blame FCE for the shortcomings of the game. And to a point, they are responsible. But at the same time, so is Sony. The only reason why people were so passionate in blaming FCE is because they wanted the game to be better than it was, even though it was already great. And there was only so much the platform could be pushed. And FCE pushed PSVR 1, I think, as far as they could possibly push it. And they were also limited to the aim controller, which was a huge conversation point. In fact, there was a point of pretty much conflict when talking about Ultra. Now, 0 Hour had its issues, but the community had the biggest issue with First Contact Entertainment and their ability to communicate effectively. And this ties back to what Sony would allow them to talk about. And I say this because of personal experience, not through FCE, but through other avenues and communication avenues as well. So Sony has a lot to play in the communication piece. I don't want to blame FCE for that. However, when it did come to Ultra, a lot of what we saw looked good. Visually and audibly, Firewall, whether it was 0 Hour or Ultra, has always been a step above so many other VR titles. Just the ambience and the ability for them to draw you into that environment and literally make you feel like you were there was top tier AAA quality that no one could match. You could argue Half-Life Alyx and some of these other games like Asgard's Wrath, or name one, and you could say, like, yes, they are enthralling and they definitely pull you in, but something about a First Contact Entertainment game where they were able to just suck you into that world and make you feel a part of it. And that's what they were able to do. What they screwed up on in Ultra, and I don't know whose fault it is, if it's FCE, Sony's, or a combination of the two. And I'm going to say it's a combination of the two. The new gear, the PSVR 2, was coming with so many gimmicks: eye tracking, foveated rendering, blah 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 blah, all this haptic stuff, right? It was coming with all these doodads and gizmos, touch sensitivity on the controllers, and they wanted some of their mainstay titles, or at least their IPs, their first party titles, to really highlight these features of the headset. So I think at that end, Sony is at a huge fault by putting the pressure on the developers to implement these mechanics that obviously don't make a lot of sense, especially in a first-person shooter. How are you supposed to use eye tracking in a way that makes sense outside, closing your eyes to shield yourself from being blinded? They decided to put it into a weapon wheel. I don't know if that was Sony's decision or First Contact Entertainment's, but using a weapon wheel makes no sense in a competitive shooter or any kind of competitive video game. There are people who are going to argue with me and say, well, you just got to get good at it. I'm sorry, but if you say you got to get good at a mechanic that doesn't make sense or feel natural, then there's something wrong with that mechanic, and it should not be a part of the game. Eye tracking to select your weapon is so antiquated in the VR field, in the VR genre. We are at a point where putting a gun on your chest and putting a pistol on your hip, or putting things over your shoulders, or having utility items accessible to you by hand, that is where we're at with VR. That is what should have been presented, not weapon wheel swapping, which was, I'll be honest, it was unreliable, it was inaccurate, and then using eye tracking to throw a grenade. That too was inaccurate. It never worked right. If you played for extended periods of time, it might work every once in a while, but it never went where you wanted it to go. Not reliably anyway. So I don't know whose fault that is, but the design of it makes no sense. It's not intuitive, and it didn't feel good. On top of that, bullet tracers should be visible in a first-person shooter so that you have an idea of where you're being shot from. But these things looked like lasers, like stormtrooper lasers, and you heard me talk about this before. This is where they went wrong. This is why the game crumbled, because these mechanics didn't make sense in a VR title, let alone first-person shooter. It doesn't belong in a VR title. Not of this caliber, not of a AAA quality. I get that they wanted to push the gimmicks of the new hardware, but this was by far the biggest slap in the face to players. The ADS system, I could kind of give them and be like, okay, I understand there is no aim controller, but people who are using the aim controller need to shut up, because we're moving on from aim controller. Yes, it was great, but the light tracking was bullshit. And it doesn't give you freeform hand movement, which you want in a VR title. Just because you like it doesn't make it realistic, rational, or logical to have in future VR titles. It doesn't. It just simply doesn't. I could throw a grenade far faster than you can button press. As long as I could take it off my chest and throw it, I could do that so much faster than you button pressing and aiming. I could do it so much faster. I could switch weapons and reload so much faster than you pressing a button and then having to have an automatic reload animation. Manual reload wasn't in Ultra either. These are all mechanics that didn't make it to the title, which turned so many people off. It was a push factor in a marketing sense. It was such a push factor. People from PCVR who are excited about PSVR 2, as soon as they heard about eye tracking and weapon swapping through eye tracking in the weapon wheel, not being able to put things on your chest or take them off your chest, and having no manual reloads, these were all like push factors for people who are already playing Onward, Pavlov, and many other titles that include manual control of your weapon. This is why Ultra failed, because it released with gimmicks that made no logical sense. It was released pushing the agenda of Sony and their drive to have certain VR headset and controller elements be in the game where they don't need to be in the game, and not giving the developers freedom to make certain decisions. And I'm saying this with the assumption that FCE did not come to these conclusions on their own, because they are too smart for that. I know Hess did mention that manual reload wasn't fun. I get that. Maybe to some it's not fun. But the accessibility and the willingness to give a variety of players, a variety of options to play the game is so important. And they fell short. I knew about this game coming out. I had a wonderful talk with Hess and Frank. I spoke with Hess, Frank, well, particularly Frank, Colin, and Trevor on a regular basis, particularly when we were streaming for their Firewall Fridays. We spoke with them on a regular basis, and they were super excited, guys. They were so excited for Ultra to come out. They believed so strongly in what they created that they were confident in the release. But they released it in the state that they did. And I don't have any, there's no sympathy there. I try to provide a little bit of sympathy. There are good qualities to the game. I do go back to it every once in a while. But the game came out and it was crap. 4 months in, they're making improvements. Things were better. I came back patch after patch, and it was improving. And I liked it. It was improving. I was dead set against not using utility. I was done using utility. Grenades, flash bombs, smokes. I said, fuck it. I don't care. I can't use them, so I'm just going to shoot. At least manual aiming down sights was a thing, and I could do that. Anyone who wanted to use the ADS, virtual gun stock, they could. But outside that, the gunplay felt good. The movement felt good. The hit detection seemed a bit off at times. And I think the bullet spread needed a little bit more balancing. They could have done a little bit of that, but ultimately the gunplay felt good. So they're on the proper trajectory. And then they released Bloodline, their first operation. They released it with Ruby, of all people. Worst contractor in the game. Regardless, they released it as they were going to release as they did release previous operations in 0 Hour, and they had a roadmap of what was to come. This is where we get into the human part of the business. You can get mad at developers and you can be frustrated with them because you're passionate about the product that they're making. And you know, based on what they presented you, they are completely capable of giving you what you want. That's why you get mad. You call them stupid, you call them incompetent, and you call them failures. But guess what? You kept going back to their game despite all that because you knew that the product that they made was good. And this is where the human part comes in. Your passion led to the longevity of 0 Hour. And it could have led to the longevity of Ultra. But unfortunately, FCE have decided to close the doors, and they are no longer going to be working on Ultra come January 1st. This hurts so many devoted players, whether they are mad at FCE or they are devout supporters, and anyone along that spectrum. They have done more for community than I know of any other community thus far. I know people who have met in Firewall 0 Hour, got married, became best friends, became sworn enemies, and created communities that would never have been created otherwise. You could say this about some other games, but I don't really know many other titles that can bring people together to the point where they will travel across the world to see each other because they became so close on a video game. That is how good 0 Hour was. That is what it meant to people. It reached people beyond just the gameplay. And FCE brought that to this world. You can't deny that. And to hear that people are losing their jobs because there's not enough support, there's not enough trust by essentially the IP owner, in this case Sony. There's not enough trust there to allow a team to at least work on a title for a year where they were incredibly successful, at least in the market. I don't know about finance or whatnot, but it was very popular. They kept a game running on the PSVR 1 platform for so many years. 5 years, still going, mind you. And they just let them go after 4 months after launch. This is heartbreaking. And I don't know if I have many other words to say besides I am so sorry to everybody who was at least once on the team. I'm so sorry that this happened before Christmas. So sorry that you're now looking for a job. I'm so sorry that so many people were giving you shit. I may have made videos, I may have said things that were hypercritical of the game, but I had faith and I had trust, and I wanted to watch competitions in Ultra. And I had high hopes. I spoke to Hess, and he was hoping that we could continue down the path of working together and in coverage for competition. And it's obviously not going to happen. Despite how you feel about a developing team, you have to remember that there are humans behind it. And some of them suck. Some of them are good. Some of them are going to piss you off. Some of them are bad news delivers. And some of them are good news deliverers. But there's still a group of people. And they don't want to put out a crappy title. And when that happened, it was devastating. Absolutely devastating. And to think that they were not working on the title, trying to fix it, or you thinking that they were just incompetent and not knowing what they were doing, is completely intellectually dishonest. Given their history with Firewall 0 Hour and the success of that, they were completely competent, but it sounds as though they weren't given enough time, they weren't given enough support, they weren't given enough money. They started losing people. Shabs, Damon Shabastry, he had left probably partway through making Ultra. I don't know if Solaris was his idea. I think it might have been his idea. I believe he was the director of it. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But that didn't sell very well. And after that, I think he went back to Raven, which is a company that works for the Call of Duty series. So things started going downhill when he left. And I'm not saying that he was keeping everything up, but like that was kind of the writing on the wall, wasn't it? One member left, and then we heard of a couple others leaving, and they were looking for other members, to fill the team to work on Ultra. And then they also announced Solaris Offworld Combat 2, which will never see the light of day. They should have just updated Solaris Offworld Combat 1, but that's neither here nor there. But these are people who worked on a title that they were incredibly passionate for, and they brought you some wonderful years, some wonderful memories. And I wish them all the best. I hope they land on their feet and they find a different place to work, because their skills are, I don't want to say unmatched, but man, oh man, they set a high bar with some of the stuff that they created, some of the stuff they were able to accomplish. And I wish them all the best. And for those content creators who are, I don't know, in between or very one-sided on this, let's keep your mind open. Be an intelligent person. Don't be a single-track minded, narrow-scope dumbass who doesn't have a half of a brain. Be someone who can look at the industry and be like, okay, they were a group of people who are working very diligently on this game. No one wants a game like that to fail, especially after the success of its first title. They may have made mistakes, but they're still people, and they deserve our sympathy, and they deserve our gratitude for everything that they brought us. I'm still mad that Ultra kind of sucks. I'm still mad that Ultra will never be what I want it to be. I'm upset that there probably won't be any league matches, despite GSPL saying that they're probably going to start a league based on it. I don't know how. I don't know how they're going to do it. But I'm pissed that it sucks. And I hope that there is a developer that Sony picks to continue the work on it, because the roadmap still exists. We got 2 new maps. We got a new contractor. And there are some things that still need to be fixed in the game. So I hope they're able to pick it up and whip it into shape. As for everybody over at FCE, thank you everything for all the years of wonderful coverage that we are able to provide. Thank you for allowing me to create this hobby of mine through amateur hour commentary and the experience it brought me. Thank you for opening the doors for me by allowing me to not only create this company, but also allow it to expand to other titles, which I am currently helping with over outside in entertainment on Alvo. It is not without Firewall Zero Hour that I wouldn't have what I have, and for that I'm forever grateful. Hess Barber, every conversation you and I had was the most professional and pleasant experience. You are an upstanding man who I know had a lot of dreams going into this title. You had a lot of dreams that you wanted to bring to the player base. You're a dedicated, wonderful director that I hope lands on his feet and finds another place to call home. And you can continue to provide wonderful stuff for gamers all around the world. Everybody else that I spoke with, Frankie boy, I've watched you before you even started with FCE, with the Frank Show, man. I used to piss my wife off hearing your song every day. The Frank Show, what? I mean, like, come on, it's one of the catchiest things in the world. But you were one of the content creators that I focused on and got me uberly invested into VR in itself. I know with your charismatic personality and your willingness to be on camera, you're going to land somewhere and you're going to be fine. So best of luck. I'm going to continue to follow you, man. And best of luck there. Trevor, you're a hard ass, man. Not only are you a badass designer and badass game developer, but you're also a badass player. You were one of the developers who actually played the game you helped create. And you even competed in the leagues that were made by the community. You were solely invested into the product, not only through the design process, but also in the aftermath, the final product. And you showed people and you created content to show people what the game was capable of and what you could do in it as long as you put your mind to it. We're always going to remember you as the chef of Zero Hour, man. Like, you were just slicing and dicing people, and those throwing knives were more deadly in your hands than a pistol was, even though that too was incredibly deadly. I didn't get a chance to talk to Colin a lot, but he helped on the back end with a lot of producing and whatnot, and he was always pleasant to talk to. And everybody else that I had the pleasure of speaking with over at FCE, I wish you the best of luck. I don't know what else to say. Leave your comments below. Let's have a cordial conversation. You can call me shit. You can call me whatever you want, and you can say whatever you want in the chat. I'm not going to silence anyone, but please do try to keep it civil. These are people we're talking about, and these are just opinions. And this was my take on everything. And I hope this message at least gets out to them so that they understand how much I appreciate what they've done. And let us support them as they move forward. But that's going to be it for me. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit that thumbs up, and also leave a comment below. Let's have a conversation about it and where you think the developers of FCE are going to go, and see if anyone has any idea what's going to happen with Ultra, because I'm still going to keep my eye on it. I'll see you guys in the next one. But until then, peace.